Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the discussion of the blue economy. This is, I think, one of the most fascinating discussions of the morning, maybe the day, maybe the whole conference. And I'd like to thank my panelists for being here to provide their insights and expertise. So just quick introductions. You can read more about each of our panelists in our program and also on the app. So I'll dispense with lengthy bios, but quick titles. Paul, to my right, Paul Bungie is the Senior Director for Oceans at the X Prize Foundation. Jenny Crusoe, Chief Financial and Operating Officer of Alta Sea here in Los Angeles. And Diane Regas is the Senior Vice President of Programs of the Environmental Defense Fund. So welcome to them all. I would like to kick off. The blue economy is such a huge and sprawling topic. It's as big as the oceans themselves in some ways. So I thought I'd just kick off by asking our panelists to talk a little bit about kind of the baseline, what the current state is, and then one of the things that's going to be fascinating about this panel is the amazing things that are happening that I think certainly lay people don't necessarily know about. We'll get into that. It's fascinating. It's very hopeful, but it's, I think, important for us to start with kind of the baseline of where we're at. So if it's okay, I'll start with you, Diane, and let you talk a little bit about where you see things, what you see as the kind of the state of, especially one of the most important resource issues for oceans, which of course is fisheries.
Sure.
So, Diane?
I'm going to start by asking a question to the audience because I find that fisheries is something that everybody knows a little bit about. Let me just ask for a show of hands if you have ever wondered about, been asked about, noticed in a restaurant a fish and the question of whether it's sustainable. You ever wondered about that or been asked that? Yeah, almost every hand goes up. And so we're going to talk today about what the state is and also some of the good news. If you could bring up slide 6. Now this is a sort of state of the world slide. And if you'll click on it to make, there we go. And if you watch the pink and the red, this is a map of how the harvest peak has moved in the world since 1951. And you'll see that in 1951, the peaks were just a few around the world. And now we have extended our reach across the far corners of the earth to fish everywhere, and we're post-peak as of about 10 years ago in how much fish we're getting out of the ocean worldwide. So that's the state of the ocean. And just to put a little bit of perspective on that, over 4 billion people rely on fish from the ocean as an important source of protein, so it's an important food resource. There's 260 million jobs around the world, 4% of the total population, who rely on the oceans for their work. And the fisheries in the oceans contribute about $270 billion to global GDP. The thing to think about, though, is this is an underperforming asset. This isn't just an environmental issue, although it, of course, is. It's an underperforming asset for the people who rely on the oceans for food.
Underperforming. How is it underperforming, Diane?
Well, the good news is that we can actually turn this story around. And I would tell a few examples of that to give you a sense of what the potential is. So right here off the coast of California, the biggest fishery, a lot of us eat sea bass or rockfish or cod. That fishery was declared a federal disaster in the year 2000. We put in place some reforms, and today it's considered a sustainable fishery and is producing enough seafood to feed 17 million Americans their full seafood diet for a year. Huge turnaround really fast. Another example, Gulf of Mexico. There, the big fish that people love to catch and love to eat is red snapper. We put reforms in place a few years ago. In the Gulf of Mexico, there's now 300% more fish in the water than there was. The profits have gone up on the dock 23% in just a few years, and the markets are stronger. So those reforms are making a difference in places like Belize. So if you go back a few years, fishermen, so there that's very small scale. The fishermen are looking for something called spiny lobster. They dive down, they have homemade nets that they catch lobster. They used to catch about 200 lobster a day, one fisherman going out. That dropped to about 20. We work with the government there to put in place some reforms, and in the course of a very quick turnaround, you started to see change. Illegal fishing, which has been a big problem there, dropped in 1 year by 60%. The amount of fish on the reefs immediately started to go up, went up in double-digit percentages within a few years, and is continuing up. And importantly, we started this in a couple of pilot sites. the 3,000 fishermen who fish in Belize are now demanding these kinds of reforms nationwide. Namibia, other countries around the world have reformed their fisheries and are starting to see more fish in the water. If you're a diver and love the ecosystem, they're seeing the seas be able to produce more food for the population, and they're more profitable for the fishermen.
So just to continue on that for a couple more questions, because this is a fascinating, very rich part of the discussion. When you have that kind of transition, there's usually a period of trade-offs where people are, being asked for whether they're fishermen or people who depend upon their livelihood on the oceans. Take a step back in terms of your prosperity or at least your income for a while we transition. So how were the trade-offs managed in these, successful fishery management programs?
That's a great question because people do worry rightly about the trade-offs. And one of the things we find is that the core reform is to give people stable, predictable rights to the fisheries. And what happens is they start to look at, okay, how can I increase the productivity of this asset? How can I increase the profitability of this asset? What they find is sometimes they do need to reduce the amount of catch for a couple of years to let the fish grow back. A lot of times the other reforms that have been put in place at the same time allow profitability to still stay the same or even go up, even if there's a little bit less catch. Give you an example. Mm-hmm. Old way of doing things, fishermen would go out, everybody go out at the same time, everybody bring their fish to the dock at the same time. Prices would really drop. When fishermen have a stable right to the fishery, they spread it out. And maybe they'll have a deal with a local restaurant. I'm going to deliver you fresh fish every day, every couple of days, year round. That brings up the value. So even though they're catching less fish at the beginning, as they let the fishery recover, they can still have greater profits.
So one of the ways that's transition is basically creating a kind of a legal right to a fishery, a zone, or a certain tonnage, or
actually, if you could bring up slide 9,
okay,
I'll show you how it works. So the way the reform works, and there's a number of different steps that have to be taken, is you see that bottom half. That's where the scientists have to set what a stable, sustainable catch level is, and then leave that bottom half of the fish in the water every year. And that has to be done every year based on what's going on in the water. And then the system allocates a percentage of the catch to individuals or to communities. As the fishery recovers and there's more and more fish in the water, everybody's share grows.
Very good. Thank you. We could spend a whole hour just talking about fisheries, I realize.
I know,
there's a lot more to talk about. Exactly. We will get into other subjects, and I'll turn to other panelists in a second, but I did want to make sure everybody knows there will be a time for question and answers at the end. So think of things you want to ask our panelists, and we'll have about 15 or 20 minutes at the end of the session to address those. So Paul, X Prize Foundation, people think of X Prize as the most kind of cutting edge, amazing stuff going on. Where does ocean management, where does the blue economy fit into what you do?
Hand in glove, frankly.
Okay.
So if you think of X Prize, where we use the incentive of a prize purse to encourage innovators anywhere to create breakthroughs that can tackle some sort of grand challenge, and most folks are probably familiar with our history in space exploration. Right. It's a lot more interesting to explore our home planet, if you ask me. That's my opinion, but it's also presents immediate and present economic opportunity per exactly what Diane was referring to, that we haven't even begun to realize. And this is where the sort of X Prize model of trying to incentivize markets to take over some of these challenge issues becomes really, really important. So if you look at an issue like overfishing or some, we can list the litany of environmental problems associated with the oceans, from plastic pollution to warming temperatures that are killing habitats, to ocean acidification, the absorption of carbon dioxide by the world's oceans that is dropping down the pH to levels that have been associated with mass extinction in the past, right? Big, scary, big problems, right? Well, the flip opportunity side of that is that this global commons that's typically external to most of the economy can utilize some of these market forces if we're able to internalize some of them. And the examples Diane gave to how we've done this with fisheries, especially in places like the US, are great examples of where you can start to harness the power of market forces to accomplish those sustainable goals that one may have. And that's exactly where we come at this, right? The traditional donor or regulatory model for dealing with a global commons like the oceans is quite frankly not up to the task of these sorts of exponentially growing problems. But markets potentially can be. And because we're in a state where there's a tremendous underinvestment and lack of opportunity to capitalize on those issues, I think there's real opportunity. Actually, if you bring up slide 1, I know I didn't mention this, but just to put some numbers to this, because this is actually an area where economists in the room, I want you to spend lots more time giving us decent numbers. This is an estimate of the sort of blue economy just for the United States, put together by NOAA and the Center for American Progress. And it's all sum told about $1.5 trillion a year as a portion of this. There's two things that are remarkable to this about me. Number one is, if you start digging back into these numbers, just how difficult it is to even come up with this, and how likely an underestimate that really is. And number two, just how difficult it is to characterize things and how the oceans actually influence the remainder of our economy. Now, you heard about how important fish is to people's livelihoods. We also have the great throwaway statistics, such as 90% of global international trade goes by sea, for example, so it's critical in that way. 99% of all intercontinental internet traffic is carried by undersea cables, not by satellites or anything else like this. So you have these really sort of basic nascent things. But if you start adding that up and try to count up, and people have tried a few times, but not very effectively, to measure the entire world economic output associated with marine or maritime economies, you only get to something like $4.5 trillion. So that says to me there's a disconnect in our numbers. We're somehow, not measuring much correctly, right? The U.S. is almost certainly not a third of global blue economy. But secondly, even if that $4.5 trillion were the best we could do to count what is realized economic activity, it's a massive undercount of the potential associated with it, just based on the resources. That $4.5 trillion, that number, about 80% of that comes from only 4 industries. 4 industries: oil and gas, trade and shipping, fishing, and recreation and tourism. That means you've got all this other massive potential for things like basic resource extraction, right? Be it deep sea mining. There's more rare earth minerals in the deep sea than there are in all of continental land masses by a significant amount. You have the possibility for bioprospecting. The National Cancer Institute a couple of years ago assessed all of the cancer, the tumor-active compounds, things that could potentially respond to tumors, and found 100-fold more tumor-active compounds in marine species than in terrestrial species. Note, we've only actually described about 9% of marine species. So in that 9%, we're finding a significantly higher potential rate for things like pharma to actually capitalize on. This is all in that existing 20%, which, by the way, mining and bioprospecting are basically insignificant portions of that economic activity now. So what does that mean? So it means there's tons and tons of opportunity. Now, the great thing in my mind is not just that we're underinvesting and somebody can go make a buck by strip mining the ocean floor, but rather we have an opportunity, because it's a global commons that we recognize provides these amazing services to humans, right? Including things like sustaining people's lives and livelihoods through fish. 1/4 of the carbon dioxide that would be in the atmosphere is absorbed by the oceans. That's a significant contribution to lowering the pace of greenhouse gas associated warming, for example, that we don't account for in any of our even our best climate economic models. All of those services are worth protecting, even if we haven't yet realized the economic activity. So that, in my mind, is the sort of put on the optimist hat and take a chance to say, okay, let's incentivize the growth of new industries, new markets and such, but let's do it in the way people have been talking about for years in terms of retrofitting terrestrial economies to become sustainable. We've got brand new ones we can build up from the ground up in a much more sustainable way. And if you put up slide 10, I think it is, this is sort of how XPRIZE, through a process of looking at, slide 10, all of the different opportunities. We're going to launch at least 3 more oceans-related prizes. XPRIZE is committed to launching 3 more, to designing, fundraising, and operating at least 3 more prizes. And this is through sort of, we're not, outside of me and a couple of other members of my team, we're not meant to be ocean people, right? We're here to incentivize brilliant blue economists to make money. we realized that to do this, you can actually hit all four of these spheres of influence on grand challenges. And any new industry should be doing exactly that. It should be increasing people's opportunity to experience the oceans, be that through economic activity or personal activity or virtually, would it be? There's a critical lack of data and information associated with it, the intelligence associated with this. We spend something like 90 times more money on space exploration than ocean exploration in the United States. Stewardship. This is the opportunity to actually do environmentally sustainable actions in this. And one example on there, as it intersects with the blue economy, is was speaking with Mike Johnston, who heads up Nautilus Minerals, which is the largest deep sea mining company out there. And he said his greatest interest is in knowing exactly where habitat in the deep sea is, because current practice will dredge off a significant, say you're going for copper nodules, for example, will dredge off a significant amount of the bottom seafloor without knowledge of what may be there or not, bring it up onto a barge, process that, and then let the effluent go off the back of the barge. Now this creates, you could imagine if you were a coal miner and you were doing this and just spouting it up into the atmosphere and letting all the excess dirt and dust go into the atmosphere and settle where it may, creates potentially hundreds of square kilometers of effluent that's damaging this. It's just as easy to be able to pipe it straight down and create a tailings mound somewhere in the deep ocean, which is exactly what Nautilus would love to do. But there's no appropriate regulation, there's no incentive, and even worse, there's no knowledge about what may be where in the deep sea to be able to start doing this opportunity. So what you've got is a company like Nautilus that's well capitalized, wants to do the right thing, has the opportunity, and in fact has a significant lack of regulatory burden associated with a lot. It's not to say that there's not a lot going on within the National Seabed Authority and a host of others, but there's latitude to do the right thing and grow these companies in the right way, and to do it in concert with those sorts of everybody from the environmental community to national and international regulators. And I think that's what we're looking to incentivize the growth of these businesses, because I don't see, outside of space perhaps, but space doesn't provide the basic services that sustain humanity for the most part. It provides a few really important things like light and energy. But that gives us that opportunity to think about how we do this and do this right. And there's very few people that would disdain that opportunity simply to make a quick buck, which I think is an optimistic place to be in.
Could I pick up on the point about knowledge and what that how that contributes? Because I think it is a really important point in the oceans and in other fields as well. So if you looked a few years ago at if you ask the question, how much fish is being caught? Where is it being caught? How much upside potential is there? Nobody actually could answer those questions. There's about 11,000 fisheries in the world. A fishery is a kind of fish in a particular place.
It wasn't being collected on an international or global?
There were estimates, but it's actually pretty hard to collect. Think about all those tens of thousands of boats all over the place. And so what we've done is partner with University of California in Santa Barbara and University of Washington to actually develop models that bring the best data for thousands and thousands of fisheries to say, how do you figure out where the upside is? How can you figure out where to make an investment to get the kind of growth in fish in the water, fish to catch, and community health that we know can come? And we're actually going to be releasing the results of that model.
Can you give us a preview?
The preview is it's really good news.
Okay.
And if you show slide 8, I'll give you a little bit of a sense of where we're coming out. So if you ask the question of where can you invest and make the most difference, a big part of that is a question of where do you reform? And if you see the number at the bottom on the left, it says 7%. Those dark colored fish represent countries that have already reformed their fisheries, are already getting that upside. And then that middle bit that says 60-some%, shows places that are primed for reform, are big countries, and if they reform, there'd be a huge upside for the world. So we actually think that if you reform those places, though it's 12 governments around the world, you could get a 50% increase in the amount of fish in the water within the next 10 years. That is huge growth. It's a huge opportunity. So how do you realize that? That's the challenge. And what we see is there's really an opportunity for investment from philanthropy from public, public investment and private investment as well, and it's going to take all three of those to make the difference. The philanthropic investment is in groups like us to go work and share the stories around, develop the data, make the case, show how the reforms can really deliver. The public investment is in things like infrastructure for accountability. How do you keep track of who's doing what? How do you have a registry for who owns what? And then there's an opportunity for private investment as well to say, all right, this particular fishery has the potential to grow as it did in the Gulf of Mexico by hundreds of percent in a fairly short amount of time. What's the investment opportunity there? And so what we're not the experts in private investment, but what we have done is put together a guide working with some investment bankers on how to do that, sort of what to think about. And we put together some modeling that'll become available in the next month or so. So investors can look at, okay, this particular fishery, put in some data, and be able to really begin to understand what those opportunities are.
Well, thank you for that. And Paul, you both mentioned the financial investment. We've got a panel, which is unusual for the Milken Institute Global Conference, of not having any finance people per se here. But it is the Milken Institute Global Conference, so we have to talk about finance and investment and business. So I just want to open it up to all of you, and especially have you come in on this, Jenny. What are some of the things, you touched on it, Paul, a little bit too, but for anybody here, what are some of the things that need to be done from either a regulatory point of view, or just maybe it's a marketing or business information point of view, to let people know, to encourage the investment opportunities that are, and develop them, that are out there? Jenny, do you want to talk a little bit about what you see from AltaSea, and maybe give us a little background on what AltaSea is all about and what you're trying to do there?
That might be a good idea. Yeah. A lot of people don't know what AltaSea is because we're very young. We're a year into being separate. We started as an Annenberg initiative. AltaSea means hope, Alta, hope for the oceans. The model was created to actually join the private sector with a nonprofit to use the ocean to solve the sustainability problems that I think we all see are coming fast toward us. AltaSea we're developing a 35-acre campus with a whole team of folks. We are a multi-tenant nonprofit. We have 3 hubs. One of them is an education hub because we really want to get the message out about what is happening in the oceans and the hope for the future of the oceans. One is a science research hub, which we have anchor tenants of USC, UCLA, the CSUs, so we have thought leadership. And then what is most pertinent here is we have a business hub, which will be a blue economy business cluster. We think that the private sector is so important to being a catalyst to creating a profit investment in the ocean in a responsible way. So we really believe that a healthy ocean is a productive ocean. I think we all can agree that the ocean is a new and maybe our last frontier, unless you think there's a planet B. And maybe Elon Musk thinks that, and we can go to Mars, but we really have to use the lessons that we have learned on the land in kind of misuse of the land, and look to the ocean to solve our food security, our energy security problems that will just become magnified as the population grows. What you touched on is very important to AltaSea. We're very interested in the biopharma. And what I was speaking to you before we got to the panel is that 95% of the ocean is actually unknown. Yeah. So we're very interested in companies that are mapping the ocean. But a lot of the companies that are doing that are also, working on sensors for port security, so that they can do this kind of more, looking at the ocean from a probably not as profitable way, but have a profitable arm to what that technology is doing. We're launching this business cluster with the help of our great architect Gensler, June of next year. with anchor tenants. It's 120,000 square feet on the water.
And how soon can everybody come and see it? Next year sometime?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
you can come down and see it now. It's a gorgeous piece of land. But that's, really our interest is working with folks that are working with the ocean thoughtfully. I think it came out a few weeks ago, the World Wildlife Fund report is really, says that the ocean, and I believe everything they say, if you put all the business, the profit investment together, it would be the 7th largest economy in the world. Wow. And, but also we believe in what we call the blue bottom line, is that we have to engage with people that want to do the investment, want to understand that sustainability is an upfront cost, and that should be the way investors and businesses work in this world today.
It sounds from all three of you that I'm hearing that this is a sphere that's unusually ripe for cooperation between nonprofit and for-profit partners. You do that, it sounds like, at EDF, Diane, Paul, you mentioned some of the things that, and also what you just said, Jenny. So is that something that's really kind of fundamental to the way whatever commercial and market opportunities are realized, it's only going to be done through nonprofits and non-commercial structures?
I think that's the only model that will work. And also, what the young man we were talking about earlier, Boyan
right.
Slat.
Let's talk about him.
He just represents the vision of Alta-Sea and what the future should be, the bright future. I mean, he's 19 years old. He has tapped into, nonprofit leadership scientists to create what might be, and everyone, even the people that are trying to say it won't work, the solution to the debris in the ocean, to the plastics. And he's raised money with this,
Crowdsourcing?
Crowdsourcing, $2 million. And
does he have a technology that looks promising?
It does, indeed. He's great, right? This is one of those innovation can come from anywhere, and everybody complains about problems. And he said, well, what if we use the power of the oceans themselves to try and clean themselves? And he's piloted a little bit of technology, built a very credible board of advisors, as you say, and is raised enough money now to start piloting a coastal size of this. Eventually, it would go into the middle of the ocean, be several hundred kilometers long, essentially, which is remarkable. But simultaneously, also have commissioned economic studies to look at what the business model associated with this might be, how you can utilize that ocean plastic as a commodity, and can you actually drive down the price so that it is at least competitive with some virgin materials issues, right? So it's an intelligent, you don't just come up with an idea, you got to come up with an entire business structure, and they're doing this.
And part of his idea is somehow to collect all the floating plastic garbage and stuff that's out there and
in the gyre.
And recycle it.
In the gyre, yeah. No, if anybody wants to, he's great. His name is Boyan Slat, which is great, B-O-Y-A-N. And he gave a great TEDx talk a couple of years ago. He's from Delft in the Netherlands, he's charismatic and charming and all this, which is really great, which I think generated a lot of skepticism. But this is what I think is neat about the blue economy. Proof is in the pudding, and there are frankly so few players compared to what could be, right? I mean, the
Right.
WWF report was so great because what it said is, look if you added it up. Look if you brought these folks together in a way that you see other industries on land forming industry associations, lobbying Congress, working together with whole investment groups, right? There is no, there's not a big VC organization that's funding blue tech. Could very well be, and this could very well be the kind of innovation that is just sort of bubbling along right now based on people's passions and ideas. And think about what a little spark could give, what something like Alta-Sea could do in a regional sense to catalyze global economic growth and industry growth. I mean, there's real.
And fascinating that call to action is coming from WWF. The old thinking was an environmental organization wouldn't be
It was in
pushing.
conflict.
Right.
But I think it's the only way this becomes affordable.
Right.
We all have to join together in government and make this work. I mean, at Alta-Sea, the idea that these scientists will be right next to the kind of entrepreneurs that are trying to solve these problems commercially, but right next to them, bring these things to market fast. But the private arm and the public arm have to hold each other up, because we can get money as a nonprofit, and I've been doing financial sustainability for 30 years in nonprofit. you really need to figure out how to engage the private sector, because you're not going to get it all done with contributed income.
One of the things that there's, I think, a lot of potential for is for people to really do the work, the analysis, to understand where's the parallel interest. There's an assumption, especially in environmental issues, that it's going to be a conflicting interest,
Right.
that it's a trade-off.
Right.
And what we're finding in the oceans is probably, for me, the most powerful example of that is that the interests are actually aligned. That if you're Walmart and you're trying to deliver seafood,
Right.
not just this year, not just next year, but 10 years from now and 20 years from now, your interest is in having a stable, sustainable supply coming from the ocean. Our interest as an environmental group is to make sure that there's a stable population of fish. The fisherman's interest is the same, the community's interests are the same. And that alignment of interests, which takes some work to identify, takes some work to quantify, and then figure out how do you actually make the partnerships work. There's power in that, and I see it breaking out all over the place, not just in oceans, but in other issues as well.
That's very helpful. Paul, did you want to say?
I mean, I was basically going to call out the sort of fishing examples again that Diane had mentioned as one of the best examples, I think, broadly, of how you can both make more money and protect the environment and benefit local communities through exactly what you're talking about: getting the right science, engaging the communities themselves, identifying what your overall goals are, and then producing what is a truly sustainable, right, triple bottom line approach to managing our resources. I mean, we live on this planet. We need these resources. There's as you say, there's good alignment. It's one of the best examples in the environment generally, and it happens to be.
It takes a lot of work to figure it out, and there still will be conflicts. I don't want to come across as too Pollyannish, but I think when people work together to figure it out, there are just more examples out there that we haven't gotten to yet.
There's the great example of the shark. Is if you kill the shark and take it to market, it's worth $10,800 if I remember the numbers right. If you have the shark in a eco tourism and diving situation, the value goes to 1.9 million. So I mean, there's a lot of ways to look at this. That if you are thoughtful about the environment and care as passionately as I think we all do about changing the way we're working with our biggest asset, is that you also can make more money. I mean, even though I live my life in nonprofit, profit is.
You're not seeing it instead of a dichotomy. You're seeing it's truly, to use a cliche, a synergy between the for-profit and nonprofit worlds in the sector.
Yeah, and you raised the question about what sorts of policy mechanisms, things like that.
I wanted to get into that.
And
Thank you.
I think this is exactly where we're looking at this. There's about 60% of the world's oceans are a part of exclusive economic zones. They're under the jurisdiction of whatever country it is. And then about 40% is the high seas, which is regulated by a few various and sundry, depending on which part of the high seas you're talking about, UN-level agencies and the like. The largest of which is the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which notably the U.S. is still not a party to. So there's those two separate issues, and what you have is a significant number of countries that have authority over their exclusive economic zone that don't have the capacity to think about how to build things like territorial use rights for fisheries, or they're just not there yet. They don't have the science. They don't have necessarily the wherewithal to do anything but take what's there now and worry about what happens.
But it's going to run out.
Right?
No.
Exactly.
But what that gives you, because those policies haven't been, for the most part, really well explicated, is an opportunity to effect exactly that change. And there's sort of two places where I think that's going to be really valuable. One, at national levels, are using tools like marine spatial planning, right? And this is pejoratively called zoning the seas. But the great thing is with this is that it enables you, if you start to get sophisticated with it, consider the fact that the oceans are dynamic and not a static plot of land where things don't move in and out. You can start to quantify in some ways, or you can in theory, all of the various economic activity and services that are provided by various plots of ocean at different times of year and in subsequent years, and at different water depths, and all of these sorts of things. There's no reason you can't do this. And with that, you can start to manage things more than just fisheries, which utilize sophisticated planning in many places. You can start to also manage the need for offshore energy generation, or resource and mineral extraction, or habitat protection, or shipping lanes, or, a suite of different things that can then begin to be managed in a much more effective model. Now, this doesn't typically exist, so it's an opportunity for policy and industries as well as scientists, environmental organizations, and others to identify the best way forward. Then the second one is at an even higher level, the sort of intergovernmental level, right? The same thing is true. If an EEZ, a national government, is governing their land, that doesn't mean that the fish don't swim through somebody else's waters, for example. And the traditional way of doing sort of international policy and diplomacy doesn't really fit with this type of a dynamic marine environment. So there's an opportunity, because we've got something like 40 different international bodies and organizations that oversee different parts of the high seas, to start thinking about new governance models. And I know this is something that the World Economic Forum has taken on, and looking at ways of doing governance in the seas that can really influence the way we think about international and regional governance more broadly, in an economic as well as a policy context. Just quite simply because the framework isn't robust yet. So it's like an opportunity to build a more robust one.
Well, so where are we at, Paul, and please come in on this also, Jenny and Diane, where are we at in terms of how far away are we from a regulatory framework that will allow us, whether it's on a global level, I guess a national level we talked about, how far away are we from that?
I think the U.S. has been experimenting with some of this, and a few other countries have as well. And it's interesting, you look at a map of the oceans and you see how much space there is between the countries. And you cited the 60%. The 60%, the part that is along the coast, is the part that is the most productive. That's where the shallow waters are. That's where productivity of fisheries, that's where productivity of other things is. And so what I see happening is a lot of individual countries experimenting with marine spatial planning or other governance models within their, sort of within their own territory. And that 200 miles is huge. The U.S. has the biggest exclusive economic zone of any country in the world. And very interesting stories about how we got there, reaching back to the 19th century. But those models, I think need to be developed at a country level first, before you start trying to make them work at a global scale. There are places, there are borders where Peru and Chile, for example, or even the U.S. and Mexico, where there needs to be coordination and planning between a couple of different countries. And to me, to see those models build up rather than trying to have, a single, UN approach that has marine spatial planning globally, I think it'll be much more successful.
I think a lot of lay people come to this whole issue and thinking of the tragedy of the commons. The ocean's a big, huge area. There's the areas that are controlled by national governments. But Diane, I guess what you're saying is that the tragedy of the commons is really not so much of a issue on a global basis. It's more within the national areas that are protected or that are controlled by national governments.
The tragedy of the commons idea, if you sort of think back to the 17th century, there was a commons in the middle of the village, and it was about too many sheep being grazed on that commons. And we see that happening within national waters because a lot of countries don't have any way of determining who has access to that commons. It's a little bit of a free-for-all. It might be totally open access to it, and that creates those resource challenges that we then see the impacts on how much fish is caught or how many other resources are out there. So the tragedy of the commons can be solved, I think, first within those countries' EEZs, and there's huge potential and huge upside to doing that.
So since we're always looking for, sorry, Jenny, go ahead.
I was just going to say there was a big conference at the port. I mean, the interesting thing about Altasea is it's in the middle of one of the biggest working ports.
Right, Port of Los Angeles.
And I think it was a year ago, we gathered all the ports on the Pacific Rim to talk about environmental issues. And it's the commons, but it's also then who is the richest person on, have access, because the developing, to deal with some of this is expensive. Right. And so developing countries are kind of saying, well, you guys messed it up for years, and now you're telling us, who now need the money, that you want us to do these very expensive solutions. And so I think it also has a problem with the financial investment that is needed to make these regulations work. I mean,
So one of the things that is fascinating, it sounds a little bit like, Diane, that optimistically, some of these solutions are going to be pioneered at the national level, already have been, and maybe will be shared across nations. And Paul, whether there needs to be a new international regulatory framework that can be worked on and is hopefully being worked on and addressed separately.
Yeah, that's it. I know it's more fun when we disagree, but I agree with what both.
Oh,
Diane
please disagree.
Darn.
No, that I've become a big believer that this is an opportunity both to experiment with effective policymaking at the national level, and then to devolve that sort of international governance framework to regional structures at best. Partly just because there are massive differences, not only economically and socially and politically, but environmentally, i.e. resource distribution, that makes a single sort of unifying framework, assuming that the entire world's oceans are a single commons, I think a little far-fetched. And there's, we're sophisticated enough.
oh, I love that image.
We're sophisticated enough, I feel like, to be able to develop international frameworks that devolve authority, accountability, and the rest to regional or national frameworks. I mean, that's not crazy in my mind. The great thing is, in the oceans, I think we have an opportunity to start to develop that. And along the lines of what Diane was saying, where you want national governments to actually experiment with effective policies and strategies.
So we're going to open up to questions in just a couple of minutes. I'm going to ask the panelists a lightning round question in just 1 minute. But a quick thing I want to get into is, and you touched on, Jenny, is the question of, we can't have a panel here without talking about big data. So you mentioned the point about how little we know about the ocean, how much is unknown. How do we get, or do we have a way of getting the knowledge that we need to have about the ocean?
Can I start?
Please. Raised hand.
Okay, so I love
my
this.
answer.
Do you mind? Is that,
No, go ahead.
No, I'm particularly excited about this because in July we're going to award the Wendy Schmidt $2 million in the Wendy Schmidt Ocean Health X Prize. So in a week I'm off to Honolulu. We're going to sail into the North Pacific to test the finalists. There are 5 finalists competing.
I've offered to carry your bags.
I think we'll.
Everybody keeps saying you're going to
volunteer for
Hawaii.
that.
We're getting on a research vessel. This is not a pleasure cruise, although I wish it were. No, it's just great, right? So this is a competition, $2 million, to help us address ocean acidification, which I mentioned earlier, right? What we found when looking at this was that ocean acidification is killing anything with a shell, be it, or it's making the lives of anything from corals to oysters incredibly difficult. Recruitment, et cetera, et cetera. We've seen economies in the Pacific Northwest brought to their knees by ocean acidification events, hundreds of millions of dollars lost in a couple of different years. The fundamental problem was that we don't know very much about where the oceans are acidifying, or at what rate, what the basic pH, for example, of the oceans is. There aren't sensors. There just weren't great sensors. There's an incredible lack of investment. So that's what this competition is. It's $2 million for breakthrough pH sensors. Now that seems, if I said it that way, it's the $2 million breakthrough pH sensor, but he'd yawn. That's why it's the Ocean Health Prize. But in reality, it's not a prize to reward pH sensors. It's a prize to catalyze a market in sensing and what we call ocean services. Because those sensors produce data. And if you can produce, we're going to the North Pacific because we're going to drop these to 3,000 meters. You have to be able to measure down, it's about 10,000 feet below the ocean surface. They've already competed in laboratory trials in Monterey Bay and coastal trials. They had to measure Puget Sound over the course of a month up in Seattle. They've already gone through these rigors. If you can do all of that, and you can build a pH sensor that effectively, easily, robustly, cheaply measures ocean pH, a lot of those other data points become a lot easier as well. pH is a very hard thing to measure.
So I can't resist pointing out, though,
Good.
absolutely agree that having stronger science in this is helpful and terrific to do the X Prize. But a lot of people don't know where ocean acidification comes from. And one of the challenges with a lot of the issues environmental issues that you see in the ocean is you really have to think about what's going on land. And ocean acidification comes from the increase in carbon dioxide, CO2 in the atmosphere getting dissolved into the ocean. So we're going to continue to get greater acidification until we wrestle with the issue of excess CO2 in the atmosphere. And so measuring it, understanding it, figuring out how to adapt to it is going to be really, really critical. We also always, I think, have to keep our eye on what is it going to take to transform what we're doing to begin to mitigate how much of it we're driving.
You're
And of course,
right.
that's moving to clean energy economy.
That's right.
That's the
That's where it's
fundamental
part of the larger
switch.
you can.
And one of the great things about data, the reason we love data is that one of the things that folks have found is that when you start pointing out the costs of adapting to climate change or things like ocean acidification, the costs of mitigating those carbon emissions through things like clean energy become incredibly cheap. Right. But in relative points. So one of the things we want to do is create the kind of data that illuminates the fact that there are different pathways we can take. But simultaneously, we believe this data can actually drive a suite of ocean services, right? So weather services is a $10 billion a year industry or so, predicated almost entirely on free public data that private companies make a ton of money off of. The exact same sort of thing. Think about that. Think about being able to be a fisher that knows where to go to sustainably catch your fish because an app on your iPhone told you what it was and it was backed by the best science, approved regulatory regimes, et cetera, et cetera. Not only are you now in compliance, but you're also probably saving fuel because you're not traveling all around and doing things. You're able to optimize what your catch is. Right? A whole suite of different things that, by the way, a business could be making money telling people to do. Right now, the best ocean services products are either bespoke things for folks like oil and gas, or wave charts for surfers, for example, or recreational fishing and the like.
Which is a worthwhile thing.
There's a ton of money to be made.
This is California.
I mean, there's a ton of money to be made in big data.
I think ocean mapping, there was the NSF just did a decadal study on where the investment of the government funding should be in the ocean. And they cited the fact that we have to find out what is going on in the ocean. And on the other side, you have a company like Esri who is turning their attention from urban mapping to the ocean because they want to see what the opportunities are in the ocean.
Okay.
So both the private and public sector have the same interest, and which is great because it also serves us to know more about what's going on. And I agree, the other part of this is that we have to raise awareness through education because folks just don't get how everything is connected. And so I agree with both panelists.
Well, then let's get some disagreement by getting some questions. So right back there. And actually, if you wait for the mic. Thank you. Could you identify yourself?
Sure. My name is Francisco Correa. I'm the former Trade Commissioner of Chile here in LA. You were talking about Chile and Peru.
I did mention Chile.
Yeah, we have 4,000 miles of coastline, so oceans are very important for us. A question related to fisheries. Well, Chile extracts a lot of anchovy and sardine to produce fish meal for the aquaculture industry. We also happen to be the second largest salmon producer. So increasing the demand of food and protein. You mentioned about regulatory things that can be made in order to increase productivity on the oceans. I don't know if you can elaborate a little bit more on that.
So the first thing I'd like to say about Chile is congratulations. Chile has one of the world's best small artisanal fisheries management network of anywhere in the world. Has done just a fabulous job, and to see the before and after pictures of what's going on.
How long a period did that take for Chile?
That's a great question. I actually don't know. It was I had the sense it's about a decade of work, but the before and after pictures that show how much life and productivity was in the near coastal area, not the anchoveta and sardine, is just amazing. The tools that I'm talking about, the regulatory tools, are fundamentally about giving exclusive rights and accountability to particular either individual fishermen or communities for rights to the asset. So in the case of anchoveta, it's actually quite sustainably managed at this point. And when we release this model, one of the things that you'll be able to do is look at the model to figure out, is there growth potential for this fishery? Not every fishery has growth potential. Globally, there's huge potential. But of course, for an investor or for a country thinking about policies, you need to be able to drill down and say, all right, which fishery, how much upside is there? And if we could put slide 8 back up, the way we came up with those bright blue fish, where the reform potential is where the upside potential is. So where the growth is. So if a country is already managing things very sustainably, they actually didn't show up on our ranking.
Fascinating, thank you. The next question? Well, I have a question, which is one thing we didn't really touch on. We did talk about acidification, which is really important. So sea level rising, this is a huge issue. How does that affect the way things are going and what you hope will be achieved in the blue economy?
So if you think about what's going, there's two components to that, a couple of components.
Yeah.
One is what's going on in the water, and what'll happen as the seas change is where you have productivity will move around. There'll be different species that show up in different places, and it'll require our governance systems to be much more nimble, because you're already seeing now in New England the cod is the cod's been practically
Cratering,
gone.
yeah.
It's cratering, and the question of whether it'll come back is something that the scientists are trying to figure out, because nobody actually knows the answer. But one thing we do see is that there's fish that used to just be found much further south that are now being found up there. So you need a more nimble governance system to adapt to a changing ocean. Sea level rise, the issue is going to be really for cities. I was living in New York when Hurricane Sandy hit, and so cities are going to need to be much more adapted to those changing conditions as well.
Absolutely. Paul, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I
or-
think sea level rise is really a great example of the sort of dynamics associated with the ocean and how it impacts human lives, communities, and economies in important ways. But in exactly that way, what we do and don't know about ocean dynamics and their response to things like climate change goes well beyond, right? So if you look at, there's a warm plume of surface water off the coast of North America right now that scientists are debating whether or not that means there's a breakdown in something called the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, right? This is, now we're getting all jargony, but in reality what that means is we may continue to see this prolonged drought well into the next few decades. Now we're talking about not just impacts on fisheries, but truly global impacts on everything from agriculture to tourism to healthcare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we quite frankly don't know precisely what those dynamics are going to look like. We don't measure it well. We don't know how deep that plume of water goes. The same is true of sea level rise. There are some places where you can do decent, what are called bathtub maps, right? You raise the level and it goes like this. But in reality, what's more concerning are things like Hurricane Sandy and exactly what those storm surges are
The
going to look
infrastructure
like.
predictions, people didn't predict exactly what was going to happen.
That's right.
So you're going to see that more and more. And you're right to connect it to drought and other kinds of impacts. There's a lot of unpredictability, more unpredictability in the system, and we have to figure out how to be able to be nimble in response.
But this is a key, right? And if you look globally at the unpredictability and what it causes, those extreme events are typically much more damaging than some sort of isotonic sea level rise. It's a few millimeters, millimeters. Because we could even come up with a nimble, land use mechanism, right? A rolling easement. Once your land is gone, you no longer own it.
Yeah, people think of it as a bathtub going up, but it's not. You're saying.
But what happens when the infrastructure goes out and you have to recover? Or what happens when southern Bangladesh gets swamped in a tsunami or in a storm surge from a cyclone? Then what you're seeing is massive displacement of people at a time you don't know when it's coming. This could be shortly, right? And I was chatting yesterday with a woman from the island nation of Kiribati, which is one of the first countries that will completely disappear as a result of climate change. As a result of a cyclone that hit Tonga last year, there was a storm surge that happened at a king tide that overwashed several of the islands. So this was not expected, but it's the kind of thing that damaged their main causeway, a host of different things that could cause the displacement to happen next year, not in 20 years. And that type of uncertainty, when you start to try to price that and associate what those changes are going to be like with sea level rise, implicates us in being much not only more nimble, but just quite simply more aware of the costs associated with investment in things like coastal economies.
Well, and investment in things like energy infrastructure. How do you invest in an energy infrastructure that's going to be more resilient in that phase? Is it a system where you have microgrids and much rather than this sort of central big system that can be interrupted
So
by
the
those
solutions
events.
here are larger than just obviously the blue economy. Jenny, did you want to come in?
I was going to say exactly what you said, is that
sorry,
the
we
sea
wandered
level
off.
rise affects all economies. For us at sea level, at AltaSea, and the port is really looking into how to deal with the breakwater I mean, we have to design to it, plan for it. It was another reason why, figuring out what is going on in the ocean is critical, because when we were trying to predict, because we have a 50-year lease with the potential of turning over for 100. We have to address it. We have to build to it.
It's going to be there in
I mean,
10 years.
it's our architect's problem, but we hope to gather the scientists together to address this, and then gather the commercial sector to work with them. So it is a problem for everybody. I mean.
Well, that's a good way to almost end this, but I am going to end this by doing, as I promised, the lightning round. And the lightning round is going to be in 2 parts. I didn't prepare our panelists for this, so we're going to get some spontaneity here. It's basically to ask each of you, what do you think the biggest, we've heard a lot about both challenges and also some incredible opportunities. And opportunities that I don't think people, certainly at the lay level, know about that much. So I'll ask each of you, but first of all, we'll go down and talk about what's the biggest bottleneck you see. What's the biggest challenge or bottleneck that, if it's not addressed, could keep us from the next part of the lightning round question, which is the biggest opportunity? What's the thing that gets you most excited about the future of the blue economy? So I'll just go from the end all the way over. So Paul, do you want to start us off? What's the biggest bottleneck?
I think the biggest bottleneck is lack of private investment. A lot of us talk about needing more public investment, but in my mind, the fact that there is not private investment, people trying to literally make money so that it's in their pocketbooks to capitalize sustainably on the oceans is as yet still the biggest missed opportunity.
Okay. Jenny?
I think that it's the lack of knowledge. I think that people just don't understand what's going on. And if the message got out, the investment, the opportunity is part of the message, it would follow.
Okay. Dan?
I'd say governance change,
Okay.
and being willing to really have the courage to make the kind of switches that are going to be needed.
Okay. So then the vision, the opportunity, what's the thing that gets you most excited when you guys deal with the issues you deal with in terms of where could we be in 40 or 50 years' time if some of the things we've talked about come to fruition?
Now I'm going to put my exploration hat on.
Absolutely. Go crazy with the visionary stuff.
You heard this, right? We've literally only mapped about 95% or about 5% of the ocean's floor, right? We know the surface of Mars better than we know the surface of our own planet.
It's incredible.
I don't know what the biggest opportunity is because we haven't looked. So in 40 or 50 years, and I'll tease this with X Prizes looking at a prize in this realm. So stay tuned or come up and talk to me.
Oh yeah. Make an announcement.
But I think I'm not going to do that. I'll get my PR team would kill me.
Do we get a trip to Hawaii?
But we're looking at this hard because really this basic exploration, I think, is we don't know the opportunities. So I don't know what it will be in 40 or 50 years.
A known unknown.
It's a known unknown, yeah.
Got it. Jenny?
I agree. I mean, I think it's actually so exciting that we have to learn 95% of something. The technology coming from Boy and Slat, that the next generation is starting to see what can happen in the ocean. And my youngest is at Vassar wanting to be an environmental ethicist, and I see things turning, and I hope even in 10 years that there are more marine biologist entrepreneurs dressed up at Halloween than there are astronauts.
I love that.
I mean, that's what I see.
Buzz Light Ocean.
Yeah, exactly.
Diane?
That's great. That's both of you very inspiring. I think I look at the world and I see we're going to have more people in the world to feed. We're going to have growing prosperity in the world from all the economic growth. And I see the oceans being able to play a bigger and more stable role in providing food in a sustainable way. And to me, that's super exciting. We could have twice as much fish.
Can I slightly change my answer? I'm not going to change my answer, but on that, like the most immediate.
Please do change your answer to my answer.
No. The most where I see the most immediate and like known possible just bottom line investment opportunity is in aquaculture. I think it's the aquaculture.
Exactly.
It's the only thing that's going to be able to provide. There is not enough land in order to provide the protein demand that's growing.
So fish farming and
and it's got to be done right. We can't have the same type of. Anybody that loves to eat shrimp from Costco or Walmart, go Google what a Thai shrimp farm looks like, and you'll never eat it again.
Pretty ugly.
It's also devastating to the people involved associated with it. It's economically disastrous. But that doesn't mean we're just starting on this, right? So I think there's actually, like right now, literally, an
Big
opportunity to
upside
do good, effective aquaculture and make a lot of money doing it.
So there is progress being made in sustainable aquaculture
Absolutely.
around the world.
One of our major partners, Catalina Sea Ranch,
great.
is doing that. We'll be at the Business Hub.
Well, this is a great way to end this panel, both on a note of opportunity and optimism, and also the fact that we don't know what the future is going to bring, and that's going to make it really exciting. So please join me in thanking our panelists for a great discussion. Thanks, Ed.